Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Levi and today we are going through all of the books I have read so far in 2023. I try to do this at the middle of the year and at the end of the year for all the books that I've read instead of doing monthly wrap-ups. So I'm going to go in chronological order as I always do for the mid-year check-in. And without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. The first book I read this year was One for All by Lily Leinoff, and I read this over audio. It was the first book I read. And I gave it 3 stars. Like, I thought it was totally fine. So this book follows female musketeers in the late 1700s, and they are getting together to basically stop the king from being overthrown, and they're there to protect the crown. And so we have our main character who actually has pots, which is really nice to see in a historical setting and how they deal with it in a historical setting. And she also gets into like this love triangle as she's trying to figure out how to best protect the crown. Now, I gave this one 3 stars. I thought it was very, like, middle of the road. It wasn't bad. It wasn't great. It was very good. I like how the author dealt with POTS and having a disability in this era of them not completely knowing why it helps, but still knowing that something helps, like compression garments. I really like seeing that and all of the love that the sisters and the musketeers had for each other. It was a lot of good female bonding. I didn't like the love triangle. I felt like it was completely unnecessary to have a romance plot at all in this book. I feel like it was thrown in simply because it was YA. And the entire book, they're trying to prove themselves to the men in the book, and that's never really rectified, which is why I gave it 3 stars, because instead of it being an empowering tale of not only were you beat, but you were beat by like teenage girls who could do this better than you, and then they were rewarded for their hard work. And the entire time they were simply trying to prove themselves to the men, and I didn't love that. So that's why I gave it 3 star. The next book I actually read in between classes in my school library, and that was Through the Woods by Emily Carroll. This is a horror comic anthology. I gave it 3 stars as well, which is not boding well for my reading taste this year. I think the first story, which is about a group of women and their father like goes out hunting and never comes back, and then eerily more things start to happen. That one was probably my favorite. There's also a story about a woman in the woods, which I really enjoyed. I think Emily Carroll has such a great art style, and I would definitely pick up more books by her. But historically, I've not really been like a 5-star giver to anthologies. I don't really love short stories as a reader. As a writer, I don't even like them, so it's kind of hit or miss. So yeah, this one was definitely just 3 star. Okay, the next book was the first book I read physically, and that is What We Knew by Barbara Stewart. This has been on my TBR shelf for probably like over 5 years at this point. I got it such a long time ago, like right when I started my booktube channel, and I just never touched it. And so it made it with me through 3 different moves. If it's been on my shelf this long, I need to read it or I need to get rid of it. So this year I have really big emphasis on reading my backlog, which means I'm reading less like new coming titles. And I'm really enjoying what I'm doing so far because I'm getting rid of so many books on my shelves that I've meant to read and I'm just not vibing with anymore, or I've read and have become a new favorite, like this one. And I even enacted a book buying ban on myself, which has been, I would say, moderately successful. I think my book intake for the year has gone down a lot. And that book ban is I can only buy a book once I've read 3, whether that's off my Libby shelf or off my physical TBR shelf. And this one was a very unexpected 4 stars. I really enjoyed it. And I say unexpected because when I looked up the Goodreads rating, it's 2.87. This has a 2.87 Goodreads rating, which is really extraordinarily low. I don't even know of like any other book off the top of my head, other than like the obvious, that have under 3-star ratings. It's very hard to get under a 3-star rating on Goodreads, but let me tell you why it has a bad Goodreads rating. The marketing team for this book did this book so insanely dirty, it's not even funny. So this book is marketed as a thriller with a little bit of horror aspects. It is not whatsoever in any way a thriller. Even the inside flap, like what it's about, alludes to it having a paranormal thriller aspect. And that made me want to eat it up. Like, I love paranormal thriller. I love that aspect. And so when I picked this book up, I was really excited for a paranormal thriller. This is not a paranormal thriller. This is not a thriller at all. This is a contemporary. There's no like paranormal plot. There's no thriller plot. The marketing for this book was completely off for what it actually is. And if I were the author, I'd be so pissed. So here's what this book is actually about. Disregard everything that you see on Goodreads and the book itself. Okay? This book is about Tracy and Lisa, who live in this like poverty-stricken, decaying town. They're best friends. They have this, I don't want to say delinquent, but they're basically like a delinquent friend group. They're all intermingling and dating with each other. It's the summer between their like sophomore and junior year. They're all learning how to drive. They all want to get out of this town, and like it's the town where everybody works. There's shitty transportation. Like you avoid certain streets because you know they're bad. The houses are all dilapidated, and they just feel trapped. And it's this very hot, muggy summer, and all of a sudden the childhood story of the man in the woods, because their town is like bordered by these woods, of the man in the woods, the banana man, you get over the name, is coming back to haunt them, and they think the banana man might be real. And that's like the premise of the story, but it's not like they don't actually think the banana man is real. Like they just know that something is going on. And really what the story is about is it follows Tracy and Lisa's friendship, how it changes, and the traumas that make them who they are. I thought it did a really good job of explaining a lot of heavy things despite its really short length, and the fact that after something traumatic happens, you and the person it happened with may have been best friends before, but afterwards, after knowing what happened, after going through these things, you may be friends, but your friendship is forever changed, and you may not ever be as close as you once were. One of the things that I really liked that this book explored was kind of like right people, wrong time romance, and we get this kind of like gentle star-crossed lovers where I almost wish I could see a spin-off of them, because they had such immaculate vibes and like this gentle, soft heartbreak to them that I would have loved to see more of. But the book focuses on Tracy's family and Lisa's family and their rocky relationships and stuff like that. So I think it just focuses on a lot of things that I really liked. I think the teenagers actually act like teenagers. I do think some of the language is outdated because this, again, was written in 2015. But other than that, I liked it. All right, the next book is the direct influence of Caitlin. I have a reading vlog for this book up as well. And it took me 2 months to read because it is 800 pages long. And that is Priory of the Orange Tree by Samantha Shannon. Look how large this motherfucker is. It's so big. I cannot believe I read a book this big. Like, this is crazy to me. I never read books this big. So the fact that I actually made it through this book, this entire honking thing, such an achievement for me. So this book follows 4 points of view. We have Moth, Tane, Ede, and Niclays. But the book is actually about an entire political system. So evil dragons are arising, and they're basically declaring war on humans. And so the entire world needs to rise up and fight back. However, the East and the West have not spoken for about 500 years. And so this book is about bridging the gap between the East and the West and bringing them back together. The West hates dragons. They are like blasphemous. They run under basically like kind of like fantasy Christianity. And then the East loves dragons and worships dragons as their gods. And so the West sees the East as blasphemous, and they've completely closed their borders and they've closed relations for 500 years. And so we were following Sabrin, who is the Queen of Innis, which is like that Western nation. We're also following Tane, who is an Eastern dragon rider. The character developments in this book are chef's kiss, phenomenal. Samantha Shannon can write a goddamn character development. The actual action, if you're going into this book looking for an action plot, don't. Think about maybe not, because this book is like pure political tension. Basically, the entire book, this amount of pages, is leading up to this war against the demons and this fight against the demons, right? And it does it beautifully. The political tensions, the world building, the relationships that are going on, they're all so beautifully done. The actual fight, like the actual war, lasts this long. It clearly is not Samantha Shannon's strong suit. I actually wish that the stakes had been a little lower, just so it was all political realness, because I feel like I would have actually given it a 5 stars. My favorite character journey was Niclays. I am in the minority for that. We have a lot of Niclays haters here. I understand, but his last scene made me cry. I'm not gonna lie. I'm a very new baby fantasy reader. I don't read a lot of fantasy, and all of my fantasies recommended by Caitlin. So I don't actually know what I like going into a fantasy, but the way that Samantha Shannon wrote politics and wrote relationships in this book, I'm like, maybe I do like political fantasy. I don't know. If you like this, the prequel, A Day, Fall, and Night, also came out, and I'm hoping to read that before the end of the year. The next book I read was Me, Moth by Amber McBride. You should all pick it up and read it. It is criminally underhyped, okay? This book is about a girl named Moth, and unfortunately her entire family has passed away in a car accident, and she's the only survivor. She's sent to live with her aunt, who doesn't really want her and doesn't really want a child, and so her aunt doesn't really take that much care of her, and instead she meets this boy named Sonny, who was taken off the reservation in South Dakota to live with his white mother, and his stepfather is abusing him. And so that summer they decide to take a cross-country road trip so Sonny can go back home to the reservation, and he takes Moth with him, and they like discover themselves and discover a lot of things about themselves along the way. And this book is written in verse, which I love books written in verse. I think they are really easy to read, and if you are a reluctant reader, really easy for you to get into because they go by very fast. This one in particular is only 250 pages. It's really short and it goes by really fast, but the language is just beautiful. This book also goes into the Navajo creation myth, which I thought was really cool. It gives you kind of this like 101 background into hoodoo, and I originally thought that hoodoo originated in Africa. It did not. It originated here in America, and it was brought about as a direct rebellion of the Christianity that was enforced on enslaved individuals. And it's a mixture of West African beliefs, the things that they learned from Native Americans, and some parts of Christianity. This book gives you like a small crash course, but it definitely makes me more interested to read about that intersectionality and read about the beliefs in general. And also the author has an aunt who is Navajo, who helped her with the Navajo creation myths. And this book was just so good. I honestly have not stopped thinking about it since I read it, and I think it goes into so much and explains so much so well in such little pages, while also developing these two characters. And I just loved it. I gave it a 5 stars. It was my first 5-star read of the year, like definitive 5-star read of the year. And I absolutely loved it. I think everybody should pick it up. Okay, the next one was actually sent to me in like November, and I definitely should have read it sooner. I read it in March. It's out now. It's an advanced reader's copy. Penguin Random House messaged me and was like, hey, look at these books. Like, do you want any of these coming out? And I literally got on my hands and knees and I begged for this book because I am this woman's #1 fan. Like, you know that meme that it's like, if there are no X left, then I am dead. If it's X against the world, then I am against the world. Yeah, that's me with Joy McCullough, man. She's one of my all-time favorite authors. This now marks like her 3rd book that is a 5-star from me, which means that she is like an auto-buy author for me at this point, at least when it comes to YA, because she also writes middle grade. I'm not getting into that, but her YAs are so emotionally destroying. I love them so much. And this one is obviously based off of Shakespeare. So this book follows Lavinia from Titus Andronicus, Juliet from obviously Romeo and Juliet, Ophelia from Hamlet, and Cordelia from King Lear. So this book follows those 4 women as they talk about their lives and deaths in the hands of Shakespeare. And one thing I really loved about this book is that you can tell that this is both a love letter to Shakespeare and also a scathing critique of him. It's kind of told a little oddly. So it's told a little in prose, a little in verse, and then a little in dialogue as all 4 women are talking to each other. All 4 women are waiting in the green room after they have died in their plays. And they're all talking to each other, and they're all revealing their stories, how they died, what role they played, what they would change. And we're following through the eyes of Lavinia. Now, Lavinia can't speak because by the end of her story, she had her hands cut off and her tongue cut out. So she can't speak. So we're seeing through the eyes of Lavinia, who is hearing all of these girls' stories and kind of internalizing them into herself. If you don't know the plays, it's totally fine. I did a little bit of research going in, but this book also explains what happened to them in the plays well enough that you don't need to research them. And what it does is it starts before the actual play. So one of the things that we talk about in here is the non-existence of mothers in Shakespeare's plays. And so part of the book is these women making up the stories of their mothers. So we start there, then we go into the actual play, and then the other part of the book is them reimagining their plays as if they had lived and what would have happened, what would have conspired. And in between all of that, we're getting their dialogue together, them talking to each other and everything like that. The main part of this book is to critique Shakespeare for using women as props in his plays and nothing more. And obviously we know that Shakespeare lived during the 1400s. There's a lot of things wrong during that era, but it's analyzing these in today's scope, which I really, really enjoyed. And then it's also, like I said, a love letter to the bard and all of these characters and all of these stories that he thought up. But it's also talking about how Shakespeare was not the only writer in the world, even though we herald him so much. So it's, like I said, both a love letter and a scathing critique of this man. And one of my favorite quotes is about mothers. They remember mothers lost to plagues, to violence, to childbirth. They remember mothers so immortal they never even trod the stage. Cordelia's mother, only invoked as an insult. Ophelia's and Lavinia's mothers never mentioned at all. These maternal stories are so insignificant, the audience must imagine characters sprung fully formed from their fathers' heads. The audience doesn't struggle with this. They've done it time and time again. But the bard did not write a play about Athena. Every single one of these women had a mother, whether or not we knew her story. I am a Joy McCullough stan at this point. I would do anything for her if she asked. Like, I don't know what to tell you. Definitely 5-star, one of my favorite books of the year. The next book I read, I wish that I had a physical copy of. That is Juniper and Thorin by Ava Reed. I've been wanting to read this for a really long time. I read it through my library and I was so conflicted. It's so funny because I was complaining to Caitlin the entire time I was reading. I was like, this book is so slow. I hate the main character. It's so annoying in here. And then at the end I was like, 4.5 stars. This book takes place in like fantasy Eastern European. My guess would be somewhere in the 1930s. And we are following our main character Marlinchen, and her 2 sisters are the last witches in her town, and her father is the last wizard. And this book at its core is a gothic horror about freedom and rebirth. We're also following Marlinchen's romance with a ballet dancer named Sebastian. And this book was so, like, I don't even know how to, it was so beautifully written. I thought going in, it was going to be like a pure horror because everybody was talking about it like it was the most disgusting book they have ever read. No, it's definitely gothic. It's definitely gothic fiction. The writing is definitely a little bit purple prosy at times, but the writing itself, like Ava Reed, she can write, okay? And the plot actually backed her up. So Marlinchen's power is that she can see visions. She can basically see into the future. One of her sisters can make love potions, and then another sister can read your love line. So the 3 sisters are trapped in their house by their father, and one night they all sneak out and they go see the ballet, and Marlinchen falls head over heels for the main dancer, the principal dancer, whose name is Sebastian. And we find out that they have these kind of mirror lives where they're both trapped and they both want to be free. And there's so many themes to be explored in this book that I genuinely think it is such a great book to read if you are a college student in a Gothic literature class. Like, I think this would be such a great book to pick apart in the classroom. So I would say the core theme of this book is entrapment and freedom, and death and rebirth, and like transformation, because both of our characters, they go through these rebirths and these transformations, and they're both trapped in their own ways. And like I said, they're like a mirror image of each other. And yes, there is cannibalism. No, it is not seen as a good thing. I don't know why this book was so controversial at some point. This book was not encouraging people to enact cannibalism. It just has cannibalism and consumption as one of its main themes. That's what Gothic literature does. One of the things that I think this book does really well is that Marlinchen's father has told these fairy tales to them over and over again, and that's how Marlinchen sees the world, is through these fairy tales. And the magic system that Ava Reed has weaved through the story makes you unsure if magic actually still exists, or if it's the power that Marlinchen has allowed these fairy tales to take over her. So she believes, like, if she's not back at midnight, she'll turn into a pumpkin. Kind of that sort of stuff. The book raises the question, like, will she really? Or has her father exerted so much power over her that she automatically believes everything he says? And is it the fact that magic exists, or is it just abuse? And it weaves this perfect question of, does the magic exist, or is our character just trapped in it? And I think that was such a beautiful line to dance, and I think Ava Reed did it so well without giving us the direct answer. There is one thing at the end that made me a little upset. I'm not gonna like reveal it here because it's a super major spoiler, but if you read it, you know at the end something happens with her father, and Sebastian does it instead of Marlon Chen, and I wish it had been Marlon Chen. I think that it would have been more narratively like concluding than Sebastian doing it. And that was basically like one of my only complaints. I definitely want to read this book again. I want a physical copy. I want to mark the shit out of it. I would read it 100 times over, and I feel like still find something new to talk about. So if you want a book that is good for talking about with your friends and may also rip you apart emotionally, I definitely recommend this one. I think it's just so beautifully written. Ava Reed has a dark academia sapphic book coming out this year. Dear Lord, I am so excited for it. I cannot wait to read it. I actually don't think I would like The Wolf and the Woodsman, so I'm going to stay away from it. But I think I'm going to really enjoy the new book that she has coming out this year. The next book I read, yet another banger, is We Spread by Ian Reid. I have read I'm Thinking of Ending Things, and I really enjoyed it. I think when I read it, I gave it a 4 stars, but after like looking back, I definitely would give it a 5 from how much I never stopped thinking about it. Like, I'm constantly thinking about this book, and We Spread kind of does the same things. And one of the things that I love about Ian Reid that would make me so furious with any other author is how many questions he asks and how little answers he actually gives. And the reason why I don't mind it in his books is because those questions are asked in the name of horror. Isn't it much scarier to not have answers to these horrific questions? So that's why it doesn't make me mad, even if it leaves me a little confused. So this book is about our main character, Penny. From our understanding, she's in her mid to late 80s, and she can no longer take care of herself. You know, she's losing time. She injures herself. Her partner has passed away. She doesn't have the means to take care of herself anymore. And so she's moved into this nursing home, and specifically elderly people, it seems, with no other people to take care of them. They have no attachments to the real world. It's like in the middle of nowhere. And Penny starts to become suspicious that this home is taking advantage of them and is using them for some sort of experiment. She keeps losing time. She doesn't understand what's going on. She keeps getting confused. And this book, its number one thing that it does, it preys on your fear of getting older. Especially here in America and in, I would say, in the Western world in general, we put so much emphasis on getting older because we don't care about our elderlies. Elderly abuse is horrifically common. Here in the West, elderly care is often pushed aside and diminished. And it kind of preys on those fears of getting older and not having anybody to take care of you, and you being placed in the hands of essentially a complete stranger who can do whatever they want and nobody may ever know. And so it pushes these fears to the very extreme. And what I love about this book is how sparse it is. It's written in prose like this, so it's very broken up, and it's very stream of consciousness because our main character cannot trust her own conscience, and she can't trust her own sense of time. I think Ian Reid has this like very good knack for this, I don't know, almost like philosophical horror of what would you do. And as Penny gets worse and worse, we ask ourselves, how much do we remember? And it's like such a good exploration on memory and preying on those fears of getting older in a society that doesn't care about its elderly. And does it answer absolutely any question ever? No. I gave it 4 stars. I definitely would continue to pick up Ian Reid based off the 2 books that I have read from him. One of my favorite horror authors at this point. The next one I read for a video that will be coming out eventually, hopefully before the end of this year, and that is Deck Z, the Titanic, and this is about, yes, zombies on the Titanic. This book was written by Chris Pauls and Matt Solomon. I got it from a used bookstore, oh god, probably over a decade ago at this point, and it has been on my shelf ever since. And you know what? This book was actually really good. I don't know where this book falls. Like, it was published in a really weird time where YA was just starting to become a popular thing, so the guidelines for YA were not as clear-cut as they are now, as is seen by the extreme amount of detail this book goes into. Titanic happened in 1912. In 1912, there's a lot of politics going on because World War I is only 2 years away. So while Titanic, the tragedy, is happening, the entirety of Europe is also in this very politically fragile state. And this book definitely takes advantage of that state and explains a lot of the politics going on. And I really liked that. But there's also just like some stuff that I think may have been a little bit too graphic for the age range. So basically, this book follows our main character, Theodore Weiss. He's a German scientist. He's an epidemiologist. and he has discovered this new plague, and the plague basically makes people into zombies, and he is developing this plague for Germany to use as a bioweapon in World War I. He doesn't agree with the ethics. He doesn't want this to happen. He doesn't want this plague getting out. So he steals it and decides to go to America with it on the Titanic. Once the German government discovers what he has done, they send a spy after him to get the vial, kill him, and return back to Germany. Obviously, chaos ensues on Titanic, and so it's just a reimagining of the Titanic if there are zombies on it, which is crazy. And surprisingly, not the first thing I have read with zombies on the Titanic. Yeah, it definitely talks about a lot of crazy things. One, the spy that is going to chase after Theodore, he has to get a ticket for the Titanic. He doesn't have one. He doesn't have a passport. So he kills somebody to get one. And the killing scene is pretty intense. He literally stabs this man and rips out his throat with a pair of bottlenose pliers. And yes, it is that graphic in the book made for 12-year-olds. Not only that, he gives the reason why he killed this particular passenger. The reason is very valid. But then we find out that this particular spy is a survivor of the Kishinev program, early 1900s. There's a lot of pogroms happening in Russia. If you don't know what pogroms are, they are systematic attacks against Jewish people in those areas, and they're straight up massacres. We find out that this guy survived the Kishinev attack. He is a Jewish person. His whole family was slaughtered. They were the atrocities committed by Russian military at that time, and the guy that he is killing is basically somebody who endorsed the attack. And so he's like, fuck you, you killed my whole family, I'm gonna kill you, and I'm gonna take your shit onto the Titanic for you. But the fact that they put that in a book for 12-year-olds is insane, because they use graphic descriptions of what happened. Yeah, so this book is intended for 12-year-olds, but I'm not gonna lie, it does kind of go hard. I've never seen a book describe the Kishinev attack before. So very well-researched book, clearly. This book also contains all of the real people that were on the Titanic. One thing that is a little weird is that they gave a real fake history to the captain of the Titanic. So the actual captain of the Titanic has never done anything except captain boats. He started with the White Star Liners when he was 13. He's been on and around boats basically his entire life. But this book gives a real fake history to him for the purposes of the book, so that the captain knows how to fight well, when in reality he would not have known that. But the history that they give him is a history that actually happened. They had him train with a weapons master in a war in the Middle East that actually existed. This weapon master was real. The war was real. The captain just was not there. That character, that human person, simply was not there for that war. So it's kind of crazy that they just had him show up there in this fake history and then pop back on to the Starliners. Very strange. But I mean, it did serve the plot. I just thought it was funny that they gave him this very real background when they could have just made shit up. Nobody's fact checking you. One of the characters we get to learn about is J. Bruce Ismay, who was one of the people who got the Titanic together, who got the funds for the Titanic. He was really invested in the project. He got people to invest in it. And what actually happened when the boat went down, one, he did not go down with the ship, which was seen as a very cowardly thing to do because he was part of building the ship. He escaped, and when questioned by the senator, questioned by rescuers of who he was in importance to the ship, he lied, and he said he was just another ordinary passenger, so he would not be blamed for the sinking of the Titanic. And he ended up writing another woman back and forth, and basically became a shut-in, became depressed, and became the most hated man in America for lying about who he was. And it just gives you that little tidbit right at the back of the book of what happened to him. Yeah, so this book mixes a good amount of history with the actual plot of the book, which is there are, zombies in the Titanic, and they have to get people to survive. And also the Titanic is also sinking at the same time. It's not sinking because of the zombies. It's simply just also sinking with the zombies on it. And it goes over in detail exactly how the Titanic sank, what the mechanics were, who the people on board were, all in this really short book that is made for children. So, like I said, this book was made for 12-year-olds, can be enjoyed by anyone. All right, so the next book I read was A Deal with the Elf King by Elise Kova. I read this on my trip to France just as something fun to read. I thought it was good. I mean, the progression it's kind of like any other romantasy out there, so it wasn't what I was looking for at the time. 3 stars. Not gonna go much more into detail than that. The next book I read was It Ends With Us by Colleen Hoover. I have an entire video about this book that you can click on somewhere on the screen. And yeah, this was a 1-star. I didn't like it. I'm not going to talk about it too much because I have an entire hour-long video talking about it. But yeah, it was not good. It was not a good depiction of abuse. Colleen Hoover, you need to be in cuffs. Okay. The next book I have to talk about is one that's been popping up everywhere, one that has shown its validity and need for over and over again in the past couple of weeks since it dropped. And that is Yellowface by R.F. Kuang. So, I have a lot to say about this book, actually. And if you don't believe me, just look at my notes. Don't kill me. I gave this book a 3-star. I think there are a lot of things that this book did so well. I think it talked about publishing so well, the inherent jealousy of publishing, the flaws of authorhood, like so many things. This book is definitely for the not chronically online reader who wants to be chronically online or wants to understand how it works. It doesn't go so much into traditional publicity as it does online publicity and the Twitter sphere. And what's crazy is that R.F. Kuang like perfectly predicts everything that happens when a book gets canceled. And that was insane. But I also really liked how she portrayed June and June's both jealousy and her righteousness, because she always thinks that she's doing something right or that she's doing something for Athena, even when she knows that she's wrong. And the farther she gets into that delusion, like, the worse that she gets, basically. This book does a really good job of pointing out both overt and casual racism in publishing, what it means to be a marginalized author, and specifically Eastern Asian author in publishing, and a lot of different things that definitely should be pointed out. And I think that it does a good job of pointing that out. And there are so many scenes that you were like, oh my god, that is too on the nose, like, I can't believe that would actually happen, and yet you know that they happened. They happened several weeks after this book dropped. The main part of this book focuses on Twitter and like the Twitter hive that comes after certain authors who they think have done wrong. And this book also toys with the question, who gets to write what? Who has the right to write about what? And it's not, the answer is not necessarily that you have to only write everything that you relate to. You can step out of your comfort zone, but the question is, do you have the right to make money off of it? Do you have the right to publish it? Why are you writing it? And so I think those are all really good questions to ask, and R.F. Kuang doesn't necessarily answer all of them because you were supposed to make your own opinions while also reading about the wrongs that this character has done. So I think in terms of those questions, she does a really good job of both bringing them up and answering them and non-answering them as well. Halfway through the book, we start like plot circling on June, and halfway through the book, it becomes sort of like the June show and like all of her problems, her familial problems, her banking problems and stuff like that. And it's like, you don't care because you don't care about June. Like, June is the main character, but you don't like her. She's not meant to be liked. So instead, I wish I had taken that time and gone more into the back end of publishing instead of focusing like solely on Twitter and publicity and social media and stuff like that. One of the things that was absolutely missing from this book that should have been discussed, even if Kuang has no experience with it, is the object of class and the object of money.
Okay, so this is actually Editing Levi coming to rectify a few things that I said in this review. I was actually discussing this book with a few friends while I was editing, and while I was editing, like reading other reviews, trying to put into words the issues that I had while reading. And if you ask me, like, my opinion now, my rating would be definitely somewhere between a 3 and a 4 instead of just a straight 3. Don't ask me the number between 3 and 4 it would be. I just know it would be between them. Okay? So I wanted to put into words the issue that I just talked about the object of class, in a way that was better than when I was recording this video, because when I was recording this video, I like didn't realize what I wanted to say, and I had some sort of epiphany like while I was editing. I realized that my issue was not that R.F. Kuang doesn't talk about poorness, even though it is an issue within publishing, right? My problem with the money talk in this book is that there simply isn't any on any spectrum. And now, I'm not upset that R.F. Kuang didn't grow up poor. That'd be so fucked up. No, I love that she grew up wealthy. I love that she was able to not want for anything financially at any point in her life. But my issue is the fact that she did not acknowledge any of this privilege within yellowface. And I know it's not like the whole point of yellowface. The whole point obviously is like splashed across the cover of this book, but publishing is such a money game because R.F. Kuang grew up wealthy, and as I'll talk about later in this review, Athena Liu is simply R.F. Kuang. Like, there's basically no difference between them. I think my annoyance is that R.F. Kuang refuses to acknowledge the fact that money is a privilege, and anytime money is brought up in this book, it's thrown away with a one-liner. It's literally never acknowledged, even though due to a lot of systemic issues in this country, marginalized authors, and specifically like in context to this book, Eastern Asian authors are more likely to be below the poverty line than their white peers. And so I think to not bring any of that up, and also to not bring up the fact that wealth is a privilege and how it helped despite the other disadvantages, it just struck me as kind of odd. So there was a lot of really good things that I liked that this book did, like talk about how marginalized authors are often pigeonholed into one type of narrative, or publishing houses will say, we have one X writer already, we don't need any more, or how Own Voices has even turned against the same group of people that it was created to help. There's all of that talk in Yellowface as well, but to not bring up class in any of those talks, I thought was a little bit of a strange choice. I think R.F. Kuang really thrives writing-wise when she is in a historical setting, when she has that launching pad, because there was, I think, too much of the author in this book when it's contemporary and modern. There was just no separation of author and character, which I think is just something that's not for me, especially when the author is online quite a bit. So we'll talk about that later in the book as well, but I think historical setting is really where she thrives and is a great launch pad for her. And there were so many things that this book did so well and that I appreciated so much that I think is a good starting point for a lot of people who want to learn about publishing. So I'm glad that I read it, definitely in between, somewhere between a 3 and a 4. And now let's get back to the rest of the video.
It's also very, very, very obvious that Athena Liu is based off R.F. Kuang herself, and I wish it had actually been less obvious. I wish that we didn't explicitly know that Athena Liu is essentially R.F. Kuang, but it's very obvious. There was a reviewer who did point out that some of the complaints against Athena Liu are complaints that R.F. Kuang has received about her writing, which I think is kind of odd to add into your book. But one of the complaints was about R.F. Kuang's treatment of Indigenous Taiwanese people in one of her books. And the person who was bringing up the fact that Athena did wrong by Indigenous Taiwanese people is like mocking. It's not meant to be taken seriously. Like, that person is just supposed to be seen as like reaching for a reason not to like Athena Liu. And when that is a critique that R.F. Kuang has received about her own writing, I think it's a little odd to put that in a book where it is meant to be a mocked statement. So I thought that was a little odd, and it felt almost like R.F. Kuang getting back at people who had critiqued her writing like that before. So I didn't love that, but again, I think this book brought up so many good points and is a good launching pad for so many questions to have about the problems in publishing and the problems that marginalized individuals face in publishing. And it's a good place to start if you are not a chronically online reader, unfortunately, like I am. So if you are a casual reader, I think this is a good way and a good place to start to learn about what it's like on the back end of publishing. I do think that it is a required read. Like, don't get me wrong, this book is a required read. I think everybody should read it. I think, like I said, it's a great launching pad. It puts into words things that are hard to explain and hard to understand if you aren't in the reader space like that or don't understand the complexities of publishing. And for some of the books, for some things that authors have been coming out with today, I do think it is required reading. Yes, especially with some of the TikToks I've seen recently, some of the book deals I've seen recently, some of the conversations I've seen recently. I'm just like, let me put this book in your hands and maybe you will understand afterwards. Thank you. The next book I read was Smash by Junji Ito. This is a horror anthology collection, and it's just Junji Ito. I still stand by the fact that I think Uzumaki is his stronger work. I think that is his peak. I don't think he's getting better than Uzumaki at this point. I'm sorry, Junji Ito. There are, how many? There are 13 stories in here. I only really enjoyed 2 so I think maybe his short story collections aren't for me. The first one was Earthbound, which was about people who are so guilty about an act that they committed that they are planted to the earth where they committed that act and basically stay there until they ossify or turn into stone, and they die. And so we find out what's happening and like what act they committed. And specifically, we're following a woman, and a man is planted in her apartment. She doesn't know why. My other favorite story was called Library Vision, which is about a man who lives in the library and it starts to speak to him. So those are my two favorite. Other than that, like, there weren't many that I absolutely loved. Sorry, Junji Ito, but I think his short story collections are maybe not the one for me. And the thing about Uzumaki is that it is like a short story collection, but it has an interlocking theme, and I think that helps with the storyboarding rather than just like random like 15-20 page stories. The next book I read on audio, and that was All the Dead Lie Down by Kyrie McCauley. I was buddy reading it with a friend. This is another gothic piece of fiction. It's gothic YA, takes place in Maine, and our main character's mother has passed away. She's 17. She gets invited to live at the Lovelace Manor and take care of the widowed wife's like 2 children, and then her eldest daughter Evie comes home, and they start finding out that things are a little odd at this mansion, and the dead don't want to stay dead. And this book was so good. Like, I thought it was just like a cute, good little gothic YA. I think if you like The Hollow Places by Crystal Sutherland, you'd like this book. It was very haunting, very beautiful. The writing, I think, was very beautiful. And the plot didn't progress slow enough to keep me bored, but didn't progress fast enough where I thought it was like too much. So I think it was like a perfect progression. The romance is like really nice and soft and tender. And I loved the ending. The ending was so cute. So I definitely would recommend this. I think it's a fun, like, quick little read. It's not too long, and it's especially fun during spooky season. So if you're looking for a fun audiobook, because I like the narrator, I would definitely recommend this one. 4 stars. I thought it was really good. So the next book got a 7-figure book deal, and I swear I have not seen any marketing for it, which is crazy because I see a lot of book marketing. Like, I see a lot of book marketing. So this one is Promise Boys. This is by Nick Brooks. I read this on audio. It has a full cast audio, which I really liked. That was fun. And it's about 3 boys who go to Promise Preparatory School. Now, Promise Preparatory School is a charter school. So at the beginning of the book, we know that the principal of Promise has been shot. And we know that 3 students have been implicated in this murder. And the book follows the 3 students as they try to figure out who actually shot the principal while clearing their own names. So Brooks does a really good job of like shining a light on how these charter schools go bad. When I was reading the reviews, there were a lot of people who were saying that their charter school had a lot of the same rules as this charter school did. And I think the author also obviously went to a charter school, but they were saying that there was like a no talking rule. So you weren't allowed to talk in the hallways. You weren't allowed to talk in classrooms. There was a rule where you had to walk on the blue line completely straight. There was a rule, like so many worthless rules, right? Like your tie couldn't be a certain color, couldn't be untied or anything, that actually don't really help kids at all, and instead make them fear administration instead of growing into who they're supposed to be. And I was really shocked by how many people in those reviews had been through those same experiences and how common they are. The 3 boys also have their own home lives that I think are all explained really well. We have Trey, who is my favorite character. His mother is an addict, and CPS ruled her like no longer able to take care of a child, so he goes to live with his uncle, who's an ex-Marine and is abusive. But the uncle doesn't see it as abusive. The uncle sees it as, I need to put a kid in his place. But that fear that comes from abuse you can see so well in Trey when he gets home and he's stepping on eggshells around his uncle because he doesn't want his uncle to get mad. And it's just a very realistic depiction of like old style parenting that really is just abuse. And by the end, there's a great conclusion to this. And I love seeing we get like interviews from the parents as well. So like Trey's uncle is interviewed, and he talks about how with trouble kids, you just have to like do hard discipline. And then we flip immediately into Trey's perspective and how he's scared of his uncle because he knows he'll get hurt. And it's just such a good depiction of these thought processes. We also have our other main character, JB. JB lives with a single mother because his father is in prison. And I love the fact that his father is not demonized for being in prison, and he still loves his father. He still has a good relationship. Our last main character is named Ramon. Ramon is an immigrant who has just recently learned English within the past like 2 or 3 years. Ramon's cousin is like the head of a gang and is trying to recruit Ramon because he thinks it'll bring protection. And also it's just like a family is just what you do. Ramon does not want to be in this gang. He wants to get away. He wants to open his own restaurant, and he's selling food at school, and he keeps getting in trouble for selling food at school because you're not allowed to do it. And it also highlights how gang life like infiltrates you even if you don't want it. So each of these boys are going through their own home lives that I feel like are perfectly narrated while this overarching theme is also going on. I will say if you're in it for like the mystery aspect, maybe like don't be, because it's super easily figured out. I mean, this is for like YA audiences, it's for teen audiences. I think even teens could figure out what's going on here. This is more a commentary on charter schools and on the relationships that these teens have with their families and like their interpersonal relationships than it is really about the mystery. And I liked that. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the conversations this book was trying to have. I enjoyed the messages it sent out. I liked that these teens felt very real, that they felt like teenagers. I liked how diverse the cast was. I liked the audiobook a lot because it was narrated by a full cast. Like, I gave this one a 5 out of 5 stars. I think what it set out to do, it did really well. And there's a lot of situations in here that teens in those situations might never have seen them portrayed compassionately or positively. And that's why I think this book is a really important book to get into the hands of teenagers, because it starts to broach these topics in a different way than a lot of media we see actually does. And it's the reality for a lot of teens, and I think it's important for those teens, for other teens, to see these types of interpersonal family relationships portrayed with the compassion that Brooks has given them in this book. So definitely, I think this is a really good book for the target audience, and I also enjoyed it as well. Gave it a 5 out of 5 stars. If you can't tell, my voice is completely fried, but thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, go ahead and give it a big thumbs up. Any questions, comments, or concerns, or any of your favorite books you've read this year, down in the comments below. Okay, bye.